to Talking Absolute Worship for Proper 14, where we'll be looking at Genesis chapter 15, Psalm 33, Hebrews chapter 11, and more of Luke chapter 12, and the words of Jesus to his disciples. So without any further ado, I'll turn to Henriette. Where are you going with the readings?
Yes, thank you. I went with the reading from Genesis and Hebrews for this one. And I'll probably dip into Luke a little bit, but I was struck by I was struck by two things. And one of them was a sentence in one of the commentaries where it said, does the congregation know the story about Abraham and the significance why he appears in Hebrews? And I thought, wow, that's an interesting thing to think about, because I assume everybody does. And I guess a lot of ministers do assume that the whole congregation at least knows the story of Abraham and Sarah. And then I thought, actually, I have a lot of people in my congregation who have returned to church after they had their childhood years in a church, never went to church, and now have come back. So I cannot assume that they actually know the story of Abraham. So for me, that gives an opportunity to actually widen out the story in Genesis a little bit. So not just a few verses that are in the lectionary, but I was hoping to just deal a little bit more with the story of Abraham before going to think about the Hebrews text. And the second thing that came into my mind is the importance that I have noticed in my particular congregation and setting of connecting a small pocket of the Church of God to the wider church in the worldwide church. And so, for instance, I have tried to connect them in the last 2 years to really other settings of church and make a big thing about it when we do connect with the wider church. And so, for instance, in the interim, we were talking about the ministers' conference that some of us have just been to. And when I came back on Sunday, I made a big thing about signing the poster for the churches in Hungary and the Ukraine, and how I have done that on behalf of all the members of the congregation, so that everyone in the congregation has actually sent greetings to sisters and brothers in the Ukraine. And it is amazing, and it keeps amazing me, how certain people, you can actually see them perk up in their pew and start listening very intently about what you're going to say next. And so I try to find as many opportunities as I can to connect to the wider church. And I think Hebrews does that beautifully. That text just goes, connects us with sisters and brothers in the same faith over cultures, centuries, boundaries, whatever, just with the centuries of faithful people. And that bridges, of course, then with Abraham. So that is what I am focusing on with these readings. I have given it the title, Where is the Faith? And I've stolen that from Where is the Love, from the Black Eyed Peas, but where is the faith? Mm-hmm. And the importance in the reading of Hebrews, that faith is not defined by just one person or just one community, but that it is something that is this worldwide story, an age-old story that brings different individuals and different stories together. But of course, especially at the time, and especially over the last 2 years, if it hasn't always been like that, it is also many individual stories, right? It is our own little faith story. It is my grandmother's faith story that is important in all of this. And of course, many people these days are outside of the church living out their faith story. So I think it's important to look at that as well. So for me, I would read the whole text of Hebrews 11 again. I think it doesn't do a congregation any harm to read more than just the verses that are given to us in the lectionary, so that they can get that idea of not just Abraham, but all these people by faith, by faith, by faith. And one of the commentaries that I read was saying that in the early church, there was a troublesome history with faith, or the Greek word pistis. And because there is the Greek mythology, pistis was one of the spirits that escaped out of the box of Pandora and fled back to heaven, abandoning humanity. And so it is something that we can look into and say, okay, is that how it feels? Is that, has pistis left humanity just completely on its own? Or are we actually in a time again where faith is quite important? And to look at that. So I then want to go into faith and what it means. And one of the, I'm going to read this out because this was one of, you'll have to edit this bit because it just doesn't go anywhere. So in one of the commentaries, I need to read this out, otherwise I will stumble even more over my words. It says this: faith is the assurance of things hoped for, would be better translated with faith gives substance to the things hoped for. And then the part where it says, and the conviction of things not seen, would be better translated with, and offers a proving of the things not seen. So then you would get the sentence, faith gives substance to the things hoped for and offers a proving of things not seen. And in that translation, the commentary says, you have a more active sense of what faith is rather than a more passive, completed thing. And in that way, it is easier to just start thinking about faith is actually something that is a lifelong journey. It is something that we do from day to day to day. And just like the people in the story of the Hebrews 11, by the end of our lives, when we die, we may not have seen everything that we hoped for. They died and they had not received the land or whatever they were hoping for. But at the same time, there are things that we do receive whilst we are on this journey of faith. And personally, I believe one of the main things that we receive is we get to know about God's faithfulness and God's promises and God's love, God's grace, anyway, whatever you want to fill in there. So there are things that do become visible, but there are many things that we haven't received yet by the time we die. And so, yeah, I think that was that is the way I want to take it into. And I was wondering if it is even possible to link, with that different translation that makes it more active, right? To link it maybe even to breathing, when you translate it like faith gives substance to things hoped for and of his approving of things not seen, then you can almost think, well, inhaling gives substance to breath. That's neither present nor visible yet, but we do it every minute of of our entire life to have life. And we do it until our dying breath, isn't it? And I think I would want to play around a little bit with those two ideas. That is what faith is like, and that is how necessary faith is for our spiritual life. Sorry, I am not making it very clear, but yeah. So
I love your.
Yeah, carry on. Yeah, please.
I love. I'm still thinking a bit about the Pandora's box thing, because I'm not good on Greek mythology, but I remember that what was left behind was hope.
Yeah.
So for that Greek way of thinking, we still had hope, but faith had to be attained. It was in heaven, so you've then got to kind of work your way to it. Whereas, yes, what you're saying is that this Hebrews thing links hope and faith very clearly. So faith is a gift we've already got, and it may not be perfect. So instead of having to work our way to get faith, faith is the thing that is growing in us to help us to continue to grow and journey. And there is a sense of the Christian life as getting to somewhere else, which is to be, fully in Christ. But it's not that we haven't got the faith yet, which was also then making me think of things like, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. That clearly we have got faith. We are given faith. And I love your idea that is not just in us, but in everybody else, in the whole church, in the whole history. So, yeah, where is the faith? See where the faith is there, helping all the time God's people to journey. So no, it's making sense. I think
you just say it so much better.
Because I was listening to you and I was kind of putting it into one thing. But I think what is the relationship between faith and hope and trust, and then God's faithfulness? How do those things all interrelate? Is not simple, but it's definitely worth exploring. So yeah, thank you. I think it's a very good start. Rachel, what did it do for you?
Yeah, and I really liked in particular what you said about breathing. Because I think sometimes, particularly with Hebrews, you get a lot of words. We had a run of Hebrews in recent months, I think, one way or another. I seem to be looking at it practically every week for a while. And just that sense of, using your breath. And because when you start thinking about your breathing, you automatically kind of slow it down and sort of settle in, don't you? And just that way that you can think about, what your breath is doing for your body, and then using it as helping you to think about faith and what part that plays in our Christian lives. So I found that really helpful. Thank you.
I'm reminded when you talk about, do people know the story of Abraham, and also the idea of the scope of this story and our links into the story, made me think of the Godly Play version of
don't
Abraham.
Go there yet, because
which tells the story of Abraham journeying up the river, the Tigris. I've got to think which one it is, or is it the Euphrates? But I haven't told that story for a while. I'd have to refresh my memory. But he travels up from and then he goes off into and it follows the whole story until Abraham dies, and this is all told in the desert box. So it's all of these little figures walking in the sand, and it finishes with it then finishes with a bride for Isaac, and they had children, and their children had children, and their children had children, until I always choke on this line, and you pick up a handful of sand as you're talking, until your grandparents had your parents, and your parents had you, and we are part of that story. You've got to imagine the sand now trickling out of my hand, the story of the people of God, who are as many as the stars in the sky and as many as the grains of sand. And every time, and even just on that little telling, it gets me because of that connection, that sense of, this is not just the story of Abraham, this is the story of God's people. And, it comes to us, and it doesn't end with us because it goes on beyond us. So if there's any way of having the Godly Play story, I absolutely commend it to people in understanding the Abraham story, but also exactly what you're just talking about, the link. Henriette, back to you.
Yes, you know how I said to you before we started, like, I will try to not go into what I will use. You have completely stolen my thunder with your Godly Play story. I cannot believe you did that.
I'm so sorry.
But yes, it just shows that you get what I was saying, because that's I have actually found a clip, and I will show it a little bit later.
Better. And
because
maybe
that is
edit out my bit.
Because in the sand you also see like the little footsteps of the people, and for me to widen out that Abraham story, I totally agree with you. And that is what I thought that would be the telling of the Abraham story, because for the people who know it and for the people who don't know it, because it so clearly shows that faith is a journey throughout life. And and there are difficult bits and there are easier bits, and God comes close to us, and maybe at times not so close to us, or we not to God, whatever, but it is that real bridge that you say with the sand, like, and now you are part of that great family of faith, that great witness cloud of witnesses, and so yeah, I would like to use that. I'm glad you agree with me, Marie.
So Rachel, how can we spoil your day? What
Yeah.
have you Where are you going, Rachel?
Am I going? Indeed. I actually found this week a bit harder than the readings we were looking at for last week, because it took ages for me to sort of really get a grasp. And I think often I try to think, if there's in my mind, although I never do it because it's too much, but in my mind it's like, oh, let me find the thing that weaves all of the readings together, and you just can't possibly do that in one sermon, because otherwise you're just giving everyone too much, and at best you can draw in. But I like to have in my mind a sense of how they all hang together, and some weeks they just don't, and for me I really kind of felt it was a bit of a struggle, and in the end the word that came to mind was goldfish, because goldfish have a reputation for not being able to remember anything, and it's that whole they can swim around and around, and they've just got such a short memory that it's all new, which in some ways would maybe be a nice thing, but I don't know, because I was thinking that we all need to be reminded of stuff. And I'm going to focus particularly on Genesis. Hebrews can come in a little bit, but Genesis was my main focus. The reading starts with "after these things," so straight away you've got to go back a few chapters and find out what these things were. And actually we're really still quite early in Abraham's story. I mean, he's still Abraham actually here, isn't he? So it's only in chapter 12 that we get him, and I was sort of immediately going back into, I'm just trying to think. So chapter 13, we've got Abraham separating from Lot. They decide to go off in their own directions, which came as a bit of a surprise to me, because I know that they separated, but in my mind they'd had a much longer thing. It was like, oh, hang on, that's chapter 13, and we only heard about Abraham in chapter 12. So that was a shock. He separated from Lot. Then Lot's been kidnapped. Then there's this sort of the war's been going on. Lot gets kidnapped. Abraham launches a rescue mission. So it's all quite exciting stuff. And then he's kind of offered a reward by the king of Sodom. And he's told he can keep whatever he likes as long as he gives the people back. And Abraham says, no, I don't want anything to do with, I don't want anything, because if I keep stuff, you're going to say, oh, look, I gave it to you. So I'm not going to take anything. I just want the people, I just want what we've had to eat, really, which was quite a nice way to put it. So then we end up at the beginning of chapter 15, and we've got God sort of offering an assurance, don't be afraid, Abraham, I'm your shield and your reward will be very great. And Abraham's a bit huffy again. Well, what's this reward going to be then, God? Because, you said you were going to give me children, and look, time's pushing on and there's still no sign of them. And God says to him, look, it's the stars we get this time, don't we? Yeah, look towards heaven and count the stars. So having got to that bit, then I went back and read from chapter 12 again, just to make sure I'd got in my mind what was going on. Because in chapter 12, you've got the promise that he'll be a great nation. And then in chapter 13, you get the promise that the descendants are going to be numerous. There's going to be more descendants than dust. They're going to be like the dust, uncountable. And then here we've got the stars again. And so Abraham is kind of feels like he's constantly being redirected by God to look at the bigger picture. I've made this promise, and it might seem really, bizarre. It might seem impossible. It might seem that it's never going to happen. But here it is. Look again at the stars, or look again at the sands. Look again at whatever it is. But it's always just bringing Abraham back. And I thought, well, don't we often need reminding of that bigger picture too? It can be so easy to be bogged down in the minutiae of running the church, for example, and our vision becomes so small and so narrow, and we forget those amazing promises from God about love and faithfulness and provision and new life and transformation and wandering and journeying and blessing and all of those amazing things. And we can just forget about them when we're sitting in a church council, thinking blah, 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 state of the roof, blah, 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 dwindling numbers. And actually, we kind of focus on the dwindling of numbers, and we forget about this massive promise of countless people. So I thought that it just would be a great opportunity to remember, to look up and see beyond, to see beyond the individual trees to the wider forest that is there. So I could bring in Hebrews, but I thought I might just stick firmly in Genesis, really. The only thing I might say is that there's the talk about, desire. We're sort of wondering, we're living. He talks about, the writer of Hebrews talks about Abraham staying for a long time as a foreigner in the promised land, and that sense of that we're kind of, we're also seeking a homeland, but we're fully resident here as well, and sometimes we kind of lose a little bit of sight of our desire for the better country, and maybe that's when we need reminding of the promises of God all the more. If I had to bring in the gospel, because I really felt bad that I just couldn't think of anything great to say about the gospel reading, I'm afraid, this week. But I did think, well, at the beginning, we do have a kind of reminder that God loves to give. And actually that's a really good thing to remember as well. Good thing to be reminded of, that God loves to give. And if you want to take, if you want to take something from the idea about being watchful and being ready, well, let's start being a bit more watchful for those things that God is giving, and let's start being ready to receive them, and not just receive them, but popping back into last week, ready to share. So yeah, so goldfish, we need reminding. And I'm going to, one thing that I did think that's really helpful to me is because I'm preparing to move, and over the next, starting probably in about a month's time, I shall start having to give my kind of final sermon in each of my churches. And it would be nice to write one final sermon that I take around so that everyone gets the same message, rather than necessarily a different one. And I thought, you know what, I'm probably, although these readings turn up, I think sometime in August, I should be using them during June and July, because I think I'm going to use them as part of what I want to say about moving on and all that's involved with that. So yeah, sorry, that's me.
No, thank you. And I think you're right about the goldfish, and I think the name of the goldfish is Abraham, because or maybe it's Abram, but because when you were saying, that in chapter 12 there's a promise, and in chapter 13, and then in chapter 15, and it isn't, which again kind of comes over a bit in the Godly Play story. Sorry, Henriette. That it's not just Abraham is held up as the example of faith, but his faith wasn't just God said, right, this is going to happen. He went, okay, and got on with it. There had to keep being conversations when God kept saying, God was the faithful one. Abraham was the one who was like, all right, yeah, but that hasn't worked out, God. Yes, but this is still the promise. Or let me tell you the promise in a slightly different way, and then maybe you'll get it. And it's that kind of relationship where, so Abraham, who is held up as the example of faith, there's actually 3 times in Hebrews that it says, by faith, Abraham. By faith he obeyed and set out for the place. By faith he stayed for a while in the land he'd been promised. By faith he received the power of procreation even though he was too old. So even the writer of Hebrews acknowledges that there's a lot of different times when God and Abraham have this same conversation, really, of God going, yep, promises, you're fine, just crack on. But Abraham, the goldfish, has to say, really though, is it really going to work? And that for me, as a model of my faith, rings true. That there are times when I think, right, got it now. Yep, got it. Know what I'm doing. Yes, I've got faith. I've got. But then, I turn around the bowl and but is that really? So I like your goldfish has seized my imagination. And if I wanted to own a goldfish, I would now go out and call it Abraham. But I don't particularly want to own a goldfish. But other. Obviously, other pets are available, so we'll let people make their own choice. I'm blethering now. It must be contagious. But Henriette, did you want to come in with something there?
I love that idea of Abraham the goldfish, because just like we are all claiming, to be children of Abraham in faith, the father of our faith. So we then can, as you say, Ruth, claim to be indeed children of Abraham, the goldfish. No, I love that. Maybe we should all get a goldfish now.
Fantastic. So just because, Luke kind of sits a bit oddly alongside all this, I just share with you one thing that I came across. I quite often look at the Working Preacher site, which is a Lutheran site, though it seems like, they kind of did all this 12 years ago and they haven't necessarily updated, because I think they go, well, the lectionary kind of comes around again and maybe different people moved on. But one in particular, there used to be 12 years ago, a letter each week from David. Now, I never know whether he's Lose or Loser or Loose, but it's Lose. And again, answers on a postcard to Phil Nevard, if you know how it's pronounced. But anyway, he would write this letter of, what should you be preaching, faithful preachers, working preachers, what should you be preaching? And on this one, 12 years ago, he said, God's promise of acceptance and forgiveness can be unsettling, even frightening. And he was looking at that. Do not be afraid, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. And he was saying, it's not that the kingdom is the answer to you being afraid. It's actually that being given the kingdom should make us a little bit afraid. Because it kind of says this is the responsibility we've got. And blew my mind. I've never read that way round. And I honestly haven't had time to completely process it in my own mind. But I thought it was a nice antidote to the whole, oh, we're the children of Abraham, we're the children of the promise, God's with us, God's faithful, we've got all these good things. I agree with all of that, but I don't want to leave people in a smug kind of place of, therefore, we're kind of okay, we'll just carry on swimming around the bowl. And we don't need to ask whether we're swimming in the right direction or whether there are the waters we should explore. But that sense of, it's our Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. We've actually got a huge responsibility in this faith. And what does that mean? And that then kind of makes sense of what Jesus goes on to say, because it does all sound a bit threatening, end of worldy, end daisy stuff of, be dressed for action, have your lamps lit, blessed are the slaves who are alert. If the owner had known at what hour the thief was coming, he wouldn't have let his house be broken into. It does all feel a bit, that makes more sense if the promise of the kingdom is actually something that's meant to make us sit up straight and pay attention. So there's something there. I'm not quite sure. I haven't completely worked it through in my own mind. But maybe it is for preachers to judge. If you think people need the reassurance of, you are the children of Abraham and you are the heirs of the promise, and that's what that means, fine. If that's going to leave your congregation in a, well, there we are then we're absolutely fine. Maybe you need that edge of Jesus saying, but the promise of the kingdom isn't that, well, then we're fine. It's actually a huge challenge to say, so we've got to make the world the place that's ready for God. And that's a huge responsibility. And it is, what was his words? Unsettling, even frightening. I thought, whoa, that's quite something. So that was my kind of take on where Luke might fit into all this. And we haven't dealt with the psalm. So I'm just going to offer that verse 17 is, the horse is a vain hope for deliverance, for all its strength it cannot save. I had a slightly mad idea, which was that you could say to people, so, what are our horses? If they don't want to talk about goldfish, let's talk about horses. What are the things that we're putting our hope in that actually the psalmist would say, it's not though, is it? And that could be, people who know me well know that I'm a bit allergic to the word strategy. Not because I don't want to plan and I don't want to listen to what God's saying and I want us to think about things, but when we get a human strategy, I think it's a horse. I think it's the thing that, that's not it. You can ride a distance on the horse if you like, but it's not going to save you. It's not going to deliver you. It's really, resting in God is a bit more complex than just getting a good plan and sticking with it, which again links back to Abraham with a number of conversations with God, a number of times he hears the promise. So I think if we think, right, we've got it now, there's two dangers. We think we've got it, then we forget it, then we've lost it. We need to be reminded. But also the danger of we've got it and we just gallop off on our horse and we stop listening to God. And God might say, that's far enough on the horse, off the horse now, and go somewhere else. And if in your head now you've got an image of a goldfish riding a horse, welcome to the world of surreal preaching. I don't suggest you say that to your congregation. I think they'd all start signing a petition to say you should have a holiday immediately. But that's kind of where that's taken us to. Anything else on the readings before we think about ways that we might explore it? And I'm sure Henriette will excite us with something we haven't thought about so far. Okay, Henriette, go.
Yes, so I am thinking of making it a service of a lot of interaction. So first of all, the godly play. I'm going to show you a little bit of godly play. Called The Great Family. It's actually really helpful, Ruth, that you have already given us the outline of that story, because I'm just going to share a little bit from the beginning and a little bit from the end to give people an idea of how that may look like.
people began to gather in villages and then towns and cities. One of the important cities of that time was Ur, and another was Haran. Now, the people in Ur believed that there were many gods. There was a god for every plant, a god for every animal, a god of the wind, a god of the rain, a god of the moon, of the stars, of the sun. The world was alive with gods. But there was one family in Ur who believed that there was one God and that all of God was in everything. They didn't know if this was true, but that is what they believed. And in this family, there was Abram and Sarai. The time came for the family to move from Ur to Haran.
Okay, so I'm just
As she
forwarding
came
it.
close, Isaac went out to greet her. And after a time, Isaac and Rebekah were married. And Abraham, so old and full of years, died. And Isaac and Rebekah buried him in the cave next to Sarah, beneath the oaks of Mamre. Now Isaac and Rebekah had children. And those children grew up and had children. And those children grew up and had children. And this went on for generations and generations. And then your grandparents were born. And they grew up. And they had children. And those children grew up and had children. And you were born. And you became part of the great family that it is as many as the stars in the sky and as many as the grains of sand in the desert.
I'm all teary now. It made me all teary. Fabulous. Thank you, Henriette.
So yes, that was the thing. So that takes quite a lot of time to tell that story. So that would take up a lot of the service. But I would like to actually try that for this particular Sunday, then link it to the Hebrews. And the other exercise I would like to, or the other activity I would like to do is for people to just give them a piece of paper and a pen and just ask them, so who in your life is a person of faith who encouraged you in your own faith? So instead of saying by faith, Noah, Abraham, I don't know, I'm just giving an example. By faith, Ruth became moderator of a church that was declining, and by doing so really inspired me as a minister or something like that, and say to people beforehand, you don't need to share that. This is just purely for your own. And I mean, you have to always put some trust in people, whether they want to do it or not, it's up to them. But I do think that those kind of exercises can really enrich our lives and bring home, like, you know what, I have this aunt who has always prayed for me her whole life, or I have parents who I know are praying for me every day, by faith they do that. So yeah, those were the only things that I came up with, but it kind of rounded off the service nicely for me.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Rachel, what have you got to offer?
I only really had one idea, but I thought I would run it kind of through the whole service, in that I thought that I would hopefully have people sitting around tables, so there's not, you know, only a few people around the table, and I thought I'd get a load of small jigsaw puzzles, not teeny tiny, like not really basic kiddie ones, but maybe, I don't know, 100 pieces or something that's manageable to do in an hour, but not, you know, nothing too simple where you can just look at your 4 pieces and think, oh yes, you know, that's it. Something a bit more than that. And I thought I would just put the pieces out on each table with no box or anything, just the jigsaw pieces, and get them to work on the jigsaw, and see how they got on with having no picture to guide them.
Mm-hmm.
That was my idea.
Lovely. No, thank you. I like it. I also think that there's something, isn't there, about something you can do and still listen to things that are going on. You know, that I speak for myself. Sometimes I think in worship it's like, now we'll do this, then we'll do that, then we'll do that. But actually, when I've experienced someone saying, you know, and while you're forming your clay into a shape, we'll listen to this song, or, you know, and somebody will do something else, and that kind of multi-sensorial thing, I think, is enormously helpful at sometimes and for some people. So we shouldn't ever be afraid of saying, you know, there's that, and also to somehow try and give people permission. If you don't want to do it, don't. You know.
Yeah.
The idea that it's like the people who say, oh, I don't like a printed order of service. Put it down. You know, don't worry. Don't let it be a burden to you. You know, just you can kind of gently opt out of things if you want to, and don't feel you're being dragged through a series of things that now we're all going to do these things. So thank you. Yeah, I think the idea of something that's there for people to do, and some people will engage more than others, and that's fine, and just enrich the worship experience. Really good. Thank you. I was going to share, I've got, it's a song. Now, Marty Horgan, I better share the sound. Songs work so much better when you do that. Marty Horgan has written the song that I've actually chosen for this coming week, Gather Us In. Here in this place, new light is coming. So, and I know that, and I'm sure he's written other things as well, but just his name was in my mind for that. And so he's written this, which is based on Psalm 33, which is the psalm for the day. And sometimes I think with the psalms, I don't really want to preach on them, but it's quite nice to have them there. And this is quite a nice one to listen to. And yeah, let your mercy be on us. I just thought it's such a nice refrain. And there it is in verse 22. O Lord, be upon us. We've put our trust in you. Let your mercy be on us. And it's based on some of the verses of Psalm 33, including some of the ones we're looking at. I'll just play a little bit and you'll get a feeling. I just rather liked it as a kind of a trust, song about trust, really. Press play, nothing's happening. Oh, there we go. Go on then. I could probably play an advert. Yeah. There you go. That's always just going to happen, isn't it? We'll play that. We'll.
If you suffer from arthritis or joint pain, you must see this. An award-winning doctor.
There we go.
Let your mercy be on us, O God, as we place our trust in you. Let your mercy be on us, O God, as we place our trust in you. Your words, O God, are truth indeed, and all your works are ever faithful. You love justice justice and right, your compassion fills all creation. Let your mercy be on us, O God, as we place our trust in you.
Stop him there. But you kind of get the idea. And I think a congregation could probably just pick up the chorus and join in, let your mercy be on us, O God, as we place our trust in you. And in my mind, I wondered, as that's just a vocal thing, I think people would probably want the words, because it's always, again, perhaps it's just me, but I'm always trying to work out, what was that you just said? So if you had the words printed out, that might help people. But you could do that with, you could do it in a time of prayer and have some images of places we want to pray for. So people just listen to the words, and it's another kind of multi-sensorial thing, I suppose. Join in the chorus if they feel like it, but see images of, at the moment you could just fill them with images of the Ukraine, but there may be other places we also need to pray for by the time we get to proper 14. And just use it as we ask, our prayers of intercession are asking for God's mercy to be on these places, just a sort of a different way of approaching that, and of using the song. So that was about it. I'm just checking. Yeah, I haven't got anything else on my piece of paper. So I think that, I hope, provides people out there in preacher land with lots of ideas of things to start you off, to start off your own ideas for preaching and for worship as you approach proper 14. But none of this can be done without God's help. So we're going to ask Rachel to pray for us all as those who prepare worship.
And I thought I'd begin with the last couple of verses from the psalm. Let's pray. Our soul waits for the Lord. He is our help and shield. Our heart is glad in him because we trust in his holy name. Let your steadfast love, O Lord, be upon us, even as we hope in you. So, loving God, may we and all those who are preparing to lead worship on this Sunday know your blessing, your wisdom and your guidance. Speak into our hearts and enable us to be the mouthpieces for your messages to be conveyed. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.